Hello and welcome back to the Rope Access and Climbing Podcast. I'm your host, Mikey Stevenson, and today we are talking about trailing the back end of controlled descent devices and what that really means with Mark from Ronin Rescue. If this is your first time here, please make sure to subscribe and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. So stay tuned. Step into your harness and get ready for a podcast about the vertical world. Thank you very much for tuning into today's episode. Today I am joined here again with Mark from Ronin Rescue. If you haven't checked out our past episodes, please, pause this podcast, go check those out, and then come back here and finish this one out. But today we're going to be diving into a little bit of a conversation that I have stumbled across, and I want to kind of expand on that conversation. But before we dive into the conversation here, Mark, mind just doing a little bit of an introduction for the people that do not know who you are quite yet?
I'm Mark. You always wonder about these. How much do you throw? I like motorbikes and rope, right? Like,
What more do you need?
rope, yeah, pretty much. Rope access supervisor, level 3, firefighter for a quarter of a century, captain on a heavy rescue unit or technical rescue unit, and yeah, it's kind of it.
Sweet.
So play both on the fire side. I play on the mountain side. I work with search and rescue as well, and obviously the rope access side.
Excellent. And for the people that aren't unaware of where Ronin Rescue and where you're located, a little bit of an introduction on that side of things.
Sure. Ronin's in just outside of Vancouver, Canada, in Coquitlam. We work worldwide. Well, we used to before COVID. Now we're running stuff primarily in Canada and the United States because the rest of the world seems to be locked down. But yeah, we do rescue standby, we do rope access, and we do a lot of training. That's primarily what we do. Military, fire, police, tactical, mountain, NFPA, confined space, rope, trench, that kind of plethora of things. So yeah, that's kind of us in a nutshell.
Excellent. All right. So today we're going to be diving into a conversation that I've kind of, like I said, stumbled across of backing up a belay system, backing up a lowering, a hauling system with an additional person. In some cases, depending on your crew size, this could be probable. But if you're working mountain rescue, if you're working small industry, if you're working some rope access jobs, if this does trickle into our industry, this could be pretty catastrophic because, just on the sense of manpower, how are you supposed to back up a system when you're already, when you're short on personnel per se?
The hardest
So,
part about this would be to keep my opinions to myself and just stick with fact.
well, yeah, like obviously maybe we dive into a little bit of personal opinion. Obviously, you're coming from both, an NFPA kind of side with great deal of experience in an aptitude of different areas, but also a rope access side. So you can also shine some light on it on a personal side when on if this was to trickle into a rope access industry, how does that affect that industry as well? So when I heard this on the Ronin podcast, during the Christmas episode, and after I regained myself and started laughing, but I was just like, is this actually a thing? Is this what's going on? And then chatting with Craig from the Cracker Jack group, he brought it up again, and I'm just like, what is this? And so, yeah, from your experience and understanding of what's going on here, where did this start? Where's this rumor? Well, is it a rumor? Is it fact? Is it
So
actually?
I guess we
Yeah.
need to, for the listener that's going right now, what do you mean by backing up the human on the belay? we're talking kind of specifically about tailors right now, I guess would be what
Yeah,
was
yeah,
termed in the
I
world.
and this is what I'm saying. Like, I don't know really what's the going thing here. Like, are we calling it a tailor on on backing up the belay with an additional person? Obviously, I'm asking the guy that knows the nose. So here we are.
Yeah, it's so what we're I guess we're chatting about in general is what's termed now as a tailor,
Okay.
which is a human being hanging on to both of the ropes on the, let's call it the downwind side of an MPD. So not the load side, but the anchor side.
Mm-hmm.
And there was some testing that was done, and maybe I'll get to that in a second, but I'll back it up because the question was, where did it come from?
Yeah.
And I think it came from people studying accidents.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at how systems fail, to be really general on it, it'll be rope over an edge. We have moving rope, a rope fails. That can also be kind of looked at as a human failing.
Mm-hmm.
Why is the rope on the edge? But then when we break it into specifics, like why did the carabiner fail? Well, generally carabiners don't fail. Generally carabiners fail because a human failed to operate the carabiner in the correct manner. They left it unlocked. They left it on a 90-degree edge. They
Mm-hmm.
tri-loaded it. Somebody had to come in and physically mess with the carabiner because the carabiner by itself is not going to break. And when you
Correct.
look at things like these other systems, I think that's kind of where the mindset started going is we have a lot of human failings that cause accidents. And I'm trying to get a bit of background here because I don't just want to go, I think this is why it started. I think it's
No,
good to have some of this thought process
this
behind
is really helpful because for the people that like primarily myself in the rope access industry, that's this is new to me. Um, this will shine some light on exactly where this conversation's going. So
it. Yeah.
yeah,
A lot of us in the industry look and go, well, if it fails on system one, that's why I have system two. One is my main, two is my belay. One is my principal, two is my secondary, whether I'm running TTRS or dedicated main, dedicated safety. And a lot
mm-hmm.
of people go, well, that's why I have an entirely other system.
Correct.
So what came from that was some testing. And some of it was backyard testing. Some of it was tested by people that are fairly competent in the industry, people that design and make gear. And what came out of this, and it was some tests with some MPDs, and the MPD in particular, any controlled descent device, you have to defeat the device to allow rope to slip through it.
Correct.
Two conversations came out of this. One is this so-called panic stop.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really a panic stop. It's a panic stop if your panic is to pull on the device or let the device go.
Correct.
For an MPD or like an ID, you've got to pull it into the panic.
Yeah.
If you freeze on an ID, there is no panic stop. If you freeze on an MPD, there is no panic stop. You have to physically toss the device in reality. You got to remove that hand. So like throw the device, then the device will do what it's designed to do. But once again, we get into this human failing. Where's the problem? Well, we've added a human to the system. And if the human doesn't, and I'm using air quotes for people that can't see this, panic in the way that the device was designed for you to panic, then you've defeated the device. So they did some testing where they had some MPDs and they blindfolded or turned the people around. I don't remember exactly. I could pull up the video. If you look at ITERS, I'm going to say 4 years ago at ITERS, this came up.
Okay.
And they have some video and they're lowering it and they either turn the people around. I think they even had like earmuffs on. They basically sensory muted them from hearing and seeing. Once again, how realistic is this? And they removed one of the ropes. They cut one of the ropes. The other person didn't realize that one rope was gone and just very quickly lowered a patient into the ground. Their rope sped up. By the time they realized, because now we've removed hearing, we've removed sight per se, by the time they realized that something was wrong, the rope had already moved many, many meters through the system. So I know what a lot of people are saying here. I don't, I'll turn on a headlamp. I can see the rope moving through the system. And this is where I have to kind of divert it again. So I'm a firefighter.
Mm-hmm.
I'm lucky enough to work in a rescue hall. I have a rescue truck. It is not a tertiary job of ours per se. That's our primary job. Our backup hall is in our busiest station. So they're spending most of their time dealing right now with COVID patients, but medical runs, fire alarms, illegal burns, structure, all of the stuff. And the rescue goes to structure fire and things like that. But that's rescue, they're backing up. It's a tertiary duty for them.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, what is competent in a tertiary duty? And I'll let that hang for a second. So I also belong to search and rescue in BC. Search and rescue says I have to do 20 hours a year on rope to maintain my currency. I guess I shouldn't even say that. It's not even on rope. I have to do 20 hours of rope rescue a year. And that could be rigging ropes in the SAR hall.
Okay.
It could be, it's not like rope access. When you and that's what I want to clarify. When I say 20 hours on rope and rope access, I'm hanging in a harness for 20 hours or I'm rigging rope, right? It's not the same.
Right.
I could be at the hall and take a 2-hour PowerPoint on how to rig the new device, and that would count towards my 20 hours. Once again, as a rope team member in search and rescue, it is theoretically a tertiary duty. I'm a GSAR member. I go out and I search and, carry a pack and do search and rescue. The rescue portion, the swift water, the HETS, the rope, the AVI, that's all kind of tertiary. I mean, it's part of the job. It is considered specialty teamed.
Yeah.
So now let's take the firefighter that's in our Hall 3, that it's a tertiary job, or let's take the search and rescue volunteer. Great people, 100%, for the task, but I don't want to pick on anybody in particular. They're a whatever in their day job. And they come out and they do 20 hours of rope a year. I know all the rope access people that are listening to this right now are going 20 hours of rope a year. I mean, I just did a bridge inspection. I spent 20 hours on rope that day. I mean, it was a long, sucky day at -7 with the wind blowing under the bridge in Prince George. But I mean, I kicked my level 1s off when it got dark, and me and the level 2 finished the D-rig and pulled off the bridge. Like, it was a long day.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of common sometimes in the rope access world, but it's not so much in the rope rescue world.
Correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, the course we're teaching right now, Ronin's teaching a local fire department, their THARP, their rope rescue program, to be an instructor. It's 11 days. I mean, we're talking 10-hour days. It's a 110-hour course. Nice. And they won't do it again for 3 years. And they'll just do a refresher then, right? So that's where I talk about, so I guess part of the conversation is, what makes competency? I personally disagree with the search and rescue model. Does 20 hours make me a competent rope person?
I would disagree, but also, at the same time, everybody is at a different location, right? Like, everyone's at a different ability, and everyone's at it. It's a running scale. It's not a fixed scale. So, you can throw out 20 hours at one person, and that could be more than enough, but you can throw 20 hours at someone else, and that's just a start. So it depends.
But this is the thing. So if you throw 20 hours at the search and rescue volunteer that works ski patrol, or as a firefighter, or a rope access technician on their day job, and are volunteering with SAR, they have a much more breadth in their thing. Or if you take the search and rescue volunteer that's the teacher or the plumber or the mechanic that has only done rope for SAR, is 20 hours a year enough? And so now we go back to this tertiary duty, lesser skill set. And I'm not trying to slag anybody here. These are good people that, are volunteering and doing a good job. So they show up, and maybe that's the first time they've touched the MPD that year. Maybe it's the second time. So now we go, is it fair to expect that they are going to be able to react in a certain manner if one line cuts? Are they going to know to throw the device? Are they going to hold it there for a second until they get that recognition factor to go, lines cut, lines moving fast through mine. My gloves stuck because we're working in the snow and I got to get my hand off the T handle or grip the other tail end really, really hard to stop this load from lowering. And how long does that process take? So in EMBC, Emergency Management British Columbia Search and Rescue, they have mandated a tailor.
Okay.
So the tails of those MPDs would come out and there would be somebody there that's feeding rope out of the bag, making sure there's no knots, making sure there's a clean feed into those MPDs. And that person would note, hey, one rope's moving faster than the other, and grab those ropes if that other person didn't have the wherewithal to figure out that that was occurring.
Okay.
Long-winded, what is that, like the 7-minute explanation of this?
No, but if that's what it takes, that's what it takes. So basically, where it started is, from my, and correct me if I'm wrong, make sure I'm not misspeaking here, is Search and Rescue BC. That's where this started, and we're talking primarily to the MPD specifically, right?
Yeah, and I mean, so now CMC has talked about, and same with the idea a little bit, if we're shark finning or double clutching, one operator, two devices,
Mm-hmm.
should we have a tailor? Because now somebody's operating both. Now, this has come up in conversation from the manufacturers
Okay.
because of different things that are going on. And my personal opinion on it is it depends. And this is where I may differ for some folks. So we were in Japan. We were running Grimp Day there. I was running clutches.
Yeah.
I was double clutching. All of a sudden I was running a 10.5 mil rope, and I won't say the manufacturer of the rope. All of a sudden I started getting bunching behind my clutch. I could see that I was getting sheath and core movement. I was
Yeah,
getting
you're getting
slipping, getting
slippage.
bunching.
Yeah.
Now I'm getting that as it's going out. I immediately called for a guy to grab and tail those ropes. Why? Because I don't guarantee that I can fully control the load based on what I am seeing as a result of my evolution there.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not at a level where you can see that and make that adjustment, should that person then be there all the time? I guess that is the question.
Right.
I don't believe we need a tailor 24/7. But what if you had icy ropes?
Yeah.
Ropes are iced up,
Yep.
right? And this is one of those things where I hate to go, it depends, but it's brought up a really interesting point and a really valid conversation piece. If I'm running MPDs with even experienced people and my ropes are covered in ice, it's been one of those days when you're going to go skiing and you're coming down, you're just covered in basically ice fog that turns to freezing rain on you and you're just coated. We've all been out though for those days. Now we're doing rope rescue in that. Friction on the ropes reduced. I'm getting a lot of slippage going through the devices because of ice. Would a tailor in that case be prudent?
100%.
Right? So I think from a roundabout way, we just talked about a couple of times where a tailor would be prudent, i.e. I do not have firm control over the rope, whether that be the rope to device matching or slippage in the rope due to environmental conditions. But that operator at that point needs to be cognizant enough of the skill set and go, I need someone to tail these ropes because I do not feel that I have 100% control over the load. I think what they've done, and I don't want to use the word dumb it down, but what it looks like they might have done is said, hey, maybe these people out there, tertiary skill set, maybe not the amount of hours on the device that are required to be quite comfortable with it. If they can't make that call, let's just add the tailor in, period, to remove that human element of, problem that could occur.
All right. So from what I'm gathering here, this is really, so this is not obviously coming down the line from NFPA, it's a conversation between, people doing backyard testing, experience, conversation started, manufacturers got a hold of this, and now people are starting to, you know, bring it into common practice. Now, how does that work? You like, okay, you noticed it, the rope bunching. You've dealt with icy ropes. You have the experience to make that definitive call, saying, "Hey, I need another hand here." But then we talk about, this person doesn't have that same amount of experience. You got perfect conditions, dry summer day, you're doing a canyon rescue. um, does it still require that tailor? So that'll depend again on the experience of that person, the experience of uh, your incident command leader, and obviously we've removed the environmental hazard, but now we're introducing potentially a lack of experience on the personnel. So, I know that I was talking to Craig about this on my last episode there about the word "it depends," and it seems like that's the direction that we're, the powers to be are trying to keep it in, and not trying to regulate it. Am I kind of picking up that correctly?
Yes and no. I mean, so search and rescue in British Columbia, it's
Mm-hmm.
mandated.
It's mandated to have
When I
tailor.
go and put on my search and rescue hat and go out and do rope rescue, I'm mandated to have a tailor now.
Okay, now I'm gonna throw this caveat at it. So you're talking double clutching, double MCD, double IDs, um, double
Double scarab.
sparrows, any of those sort of devices where one operator is operating both lines and having a dual tension line, um, lower. Now, what if you are operating a single device with, um, a mobile fall arrestor, i.e., the ASAP? Is it still mandated to have a tailor on that controlled descent device line?
So I'm going to answer the question, but then I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent because that's what I do. So in search and
Perfect.
rescue, there's only a few devices that are allowed for controlled descent.
Okay.
And I mean, the list is more than this, but generally, you're going to find teams that have, as long if they're not mountain rescue. If you got a mountain rescue team, you're going to have some different parameters because mountain rescue and rope rescue are different parameters under the search and rescue umbrella.
Yes.
So mountain rescue, you're going to end up getting into some, plaquettes,
Lightweight.
scarabs, sorry,
Yeah.
not scarabs, eights or ATCs, reversals, that kind of stuff. So we'll
Yeah.
keep that aside for right now.
We'll leave that off to the side,
Yeah,
and not poke the bear of Craig, their Cracker Jack group, and talk about lightweight gear. Yeah.
exactly. But for the rope rescue, most teams have an MPD and they have a scarab.
Okay.
Now, to make the scarab whistle, whistle stop, your test there, they do run a prusik behind it. So
Behind
you
and
are
not in front.
managing,
Interesting.
yeah, so you are managing the prusik.
Mm-hmm.
They found, just as sidebar, prusiks grip loose rope better than tight rope.
Makes total sense. Yep.
So they're putting them behind now. I mean, I know when I started this whole thing 10, 15 years
So
ago, when we started this, we were out front, we used the scissor technique.
yeah.
Now we're in behind using like a belay technique between the anchor and the scarab.
Yeah, because you're gonna have to basically extend the scarab three,
On a
four
60
feet,
centimeter sling.
three,
Yep.
4 feet, just to allow the prusik to react and not be defeated by the scarab running back, like running right into it. So
Minding the prusik. Yeah.
I'm
So they've
I'm
got a
just
system
visual.
set
I'm
up.
visualizing it. This is where we're talking, and making sure that we're on the same page.
But so when we talk about this, they mandate a tailor in that system as well, which at first, like, I'm coming from a different world and I go to take this training and I'm kind of like sitting there going, I don't understand. what are the chances of both people like pulling rope through their prusik and failing it at the exact same time? Like that's kind of what the prusik's there for. If you hitchhiker grip, rope comes out of your hands. Like I could see the MPD, you're lifting it up, you're turning it okay, but
That that sounds
now we're
like
talking about we defeated the prusiks, right?
I think that sounds more like natural selection of the situation at hand. Because like if everything lines up, the Swiss cheese effect and the entire world explodes in front of you, the game of what if, that sounds what that's what that sounds like.
What I was told, what came back to me from the instructors, when I pulled them aside and I said, hey, I'm just going to ask this question, and I'm just curious about this. And they said what they don't want to do is confuse students by having them tail on one system and not on the other.
Okay, so it goes into a safer for training purpose, but not realistic for operation purpose.
What we're doing is we're running rescue by rote instead of by principle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
That's an opinion, not a fact. So
Let's
when you
specify
say,
that was opinion, not
yeah,
fact.
yeah. So when you talk about putting an ASAP out front,
Yeah.
they don't authorize the use of ASAPs.
Okay. Is
So
and who's this again? This is
this is
BC.
emergency management, British Columbia search and
Okay.
rescue.
Okay.
So a device like if we want to use a clutch, we would have to send it to them and send the stats, and they'd have to do the testing on it to make sure that it meets the criteria that EMBC SAR has put out for a controlled descent device.
Okay.
So the ASAP has not made it through that particular testing. And not that it hasn't, not that it's failed, it just no one's actually presented it as an option for that. And
Okay.
so that's not even, it's one of those things, it's not even an option for me when I go into that world.
Okay. That makes more
So,
sense because I'm just like, you know, I know you and I know your minor gear stash that you have in your backyard there. I'm like, why aren't you just pulling out the ASAP
that's why.
or
So
the 20 or 30 other ASAPs you have?
pretty much. But yeah, it's one of those things when you change hats, you know, whether I'm wearing my
Yep.
fire hat or my Ronin hat or my rope access hat. Now I've got a SAR hat to throw on there, and there's certain parameters every single one of those groups do and do not allow me to play.
Okay, perfect. That makes total sense. It's following the procedures in which you adhere to at that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on the other side, imagine a controlled descent device that worked like an ASAP, where if the device started to run away on you and it hit a certain meter per second and it locked up,
Mm-hmm.
imagine a clutch or an MPD with an ASAP built into it, right? So now
That would
we've
be
defeated the
pretty
device.
innovative.
We defeated the device for a controlled descent device. We're lowering. The other line breaks. I don't notice it. The line starts to get away on me. The controlled descent device locks up by itself because it senses that the rope's moving too fast through the system. All you manufacturers that are listening to this right now, I just made you your next $1,000,000. So there you
Wink,
go.
wink, nudge, nudge. Anybody out there?
Bueller.
Yeah, yeah.
And so to answer your question specifically, not outside of like EMBC, by putting a
Mhm.
force, um, you know, uh, speed limiting device, not a force limiting device, sorry, a
Yeah,
speed limiting
speed.
device into the system. Heck, why have two devices? Why don't we just make one that we can lower and speed limits anyways? And the ASAP does that very well. Everybody that's worked with an ASAP and an ID has done this where they've decided to wrap too fast. And what ends up happening, your ASAP ends up catching, and you're like, oh man, really?
That does
It's
not happen in competition, just FYI.
hey, want to go on a tangent? A competition that was out one year, the guys were putting the ASAPs on upside down
Ooh.
so they could run faster down the road.
Oh yeah,
No,
yeah.
there's
Here's your
no backup
sign.
in this system.
Here's your sign.
I couldn't believe the organizers didn't catch on to it because we're on
Okay.
the ground going, they're going too fast. Why is the black tab at the top?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Right? But yeah, it's C'est la vie. Um, but yeah, I think it's one of those things where you could definitely do that and solve that problem.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, like, I think if I'm not mistaken, one of the new clutch videos that's out there, and I don't know if it's by CMC or Harkin or if it's by an offshoot, they're running ASAPs in front of the lines for that purpose. That, yeah, if something goes wrong and the load gets away from you, the ASAP's going to capture. It brings up some other issues. Now we've got deployment distance of ASAPs, possibly blah, 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 whatever, right? Like that's a rope access thing we look at almost daily, but it's not thought of a lot in the rope rescue side. We don't think about if I'm too close to the edge and I put something there that's going to deploy, am I going to hit an edge or go over an edge?
Yeah.
So that's a new mindset for rope rescue.
Yeah, and I think that between people like yourself, and others, and myself here, we're trying to create that mindset to make people think, and not just go back to, well, I've done this for the last 20 years. And with our networks here and our platforms, we're bringing that awareness to people to kind of like sit back, listen to the conversation, be part of the conversation, and think about what you're doing the next time you're doing it, and just kind of look at the consequences.
Yeah, and I think that's the big thing. I mean, it goes back to that principle based, and I see that a lot in the rope access. I mean, there's some stuff that they're pretty firm on that becomes a little more rote, but generally it's they look at principles. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
they don't really care. We did the high line in our level 3, and we couldn't get access to the gear room because we were in a state fire academy in Chicago at the time, and we couldn't get down there. And the guy's like, if you guys want to rig with what's on your harness, I'm willing to. We're using like bowlines to anchor and stuff. And the guy's like, yeah, it works. Way you go, right? Like
Yep.
the principles were met, check mark in the box, away we go. And I like to think that rope rescue's trying to go that way.
Yep.
And and I'm torn. I really am, because on one half, it's called technical rescue.
Yes.
Technical's in there for us. It's not just called rope rescue. There has to be some level of knowledge of what you're doing.
I.e. competence.
On the other hand, I get it. If you pile 8 pounds of poo into a 2 pound bag, I don't know if this is X-rated podcast, you're going to get spillover. And
Yeah.
that's where people start going back to by rote, because they go, if we do X, Y, and Z and it meets 95% of what we do,
Mm-hmm.
then we'll just worry about the 5% when it shows up.
Yeah.
And, there's good, valid arguments for both of those things. You look at even from a Sprat or an IRATA point of view. Why are we taught to do the initial rescues with the gear we have? Because that's the gear that your partner's going to have on rope with them, right? And at the base level, it's okay, let's rescue with this. That's what they're going to have, and away we move forward. And, there's good validity in that. But then as you move through the rope access system, you get more and more leeway into the principles. So as long as you solve the problem, they don't really care how.
Yeah.
Rope rescue kind of hasn't got there. And it's like, this is the way to do a pickoff. You go to school, you learn that way. There's a million ways to do a pickoff. But you get taught away, and then you kind of get stuck in that rut,
Yeah.
right? Instead of going, these are the principles of a pickoff, here are some different variations of how to do it. And I think that's where, to go back to this tailing, the conversations come back, where it's like, if you do it like this, 99% of the time, you're not going to have an issue. Where if you don't do it like this, and we get people that don't have the experience to call for the tailor, that 5% of the time, maybe the 10% of the time, we might end up with an issue.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's like, I sought out the MPD when it came out, and it was like, wow, like this is like the new and exciting device. And obviously, time changes that opinion, and testing changes that opinion, and it's a great device, but it also comes with a big list of cautionary points as well. So, that's where that experience hopefully overcompensates for those cautionary points when utilizing equipment or, maneuvers, techniques that you're not super familiar with.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head where it's so the MPD 2000 and I want to say 8. I was in
Eight,
Invermere.
nine, somewhere in there.
2008, there's a picture of me in Invermere with the prototype with it at Kirk's.
Okay, that makes total sense. Yep.
12 years old. I
Yep.
mean, who knows how long he was working on it before that? That was the prototype that was the most functional and looked most like what you would expect to see in MPD today.
Yep.
Say it's been on the market for a dozen years.
Yeah.
And so is it getting older? Yeah. But it's also one of these things, and to bring it back to the rope access folks that'll be listening, why do I use an ASAP? Well, it limits forces. Well, I use the Petzl shock absorber with it. I'm going to use the word shock absorber so I don't get into which one, but because that limits the forces to meet the ASAP so I don't shred rope.
Yes.
And I hook it to the front of my Petzl harness because the Petzl harness is rated to have that shock absorber attached there so that it puts the forces around my body properly and doesn't exceed them for what I'm either regulatory or manufacturer wise allowed to take as a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And then I go buy Yates's Voyager harness. And there's nothing wrong with the Voyager harness, but I don't know if the Voyager harness has done the same testing that Petzl has done with an Aveo harness or something to say that I can hook it there. Because now I've started to mix gear in. And maybe I've used a DMM carabiner instead of a Petzl carabiner, and maybe it's a little bit longer now as well because I've mixed some gear in. And now take that thought process, and most guys in rope access can go, okay, I can see where you're going with that. We're using like equipment, and that's why it's safe and why we can use it in certain applications.
Mm-hmm.
Was Kirk just ahead of his time? He's made a device where if you look at the force limiting world, like where Rescue's going with jolt forces and force limiting, he made a device 12 years ago that works in the force limiting world. Now, did he make a device and then make force limiting based on the device? Or more likely, Kirk's a pretty smart dude. Was he thinking force limiting like 15 years ago and started making devices that work? You look at the CTOM's trace kit. It is a force limiting device because the minimum braking strength of the equipment is so low that it spits out rope before you get into the minimum braking strengths. And now that's just been applied into larger ropes. And Kirk made this, the QD as well. Or designed it. He didn't make it, but he designed the QD as well. Mm-hmm. And so that whole force limiting concept was the MPD ahead of its time. And as we defeat it and work it, have we now gone into a situation where we're using the MPD and it's finally caught up to where we should be, but we're not at the stage to utilize it correctly? Because you think about it, for the last dozen years, we've just been running MPDs, a lot of times dedicated main, dedicated belay.
Yeah.
And is that a problem? Well, if we're running an ASAP and a pitch head or something, or if we're running a tandem prussic and we blow the main line, the belay is always caught.
Yeah.
Because we're not really defeating the belay. We're not defeating the ASAP. The tandem prussics is, you can certainly defeat it. And there was, people were just drilled into their head about how to run a tandem prussic belay. And then we went to 540 and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And now we're into twin tension. Is the device, was it just ahead of its time? Mm-hmm. And we never were really trained, or our thought process was never tuned into using it properly.
Yeah.
You
could say that. You could say that for a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Right? Everyone's had the conversation about the ASAP and deployment, right? Oh, you can't use the ASAP within 13 feet of the ground because you're going to hit the bottom.
Yeah.
If operating a ASAP correctly and doing what you're supposed to do, there's no chance you're going to fully deploy a shock absorber. So you're going off of a theoretical concept brought to you from a fall protection industry being like, oh, the maximum deployment of this is X number of, inches, centimeters, whatever. And it's going to deploy. Well, you also have to look at the testing results and manufacturer impact forcing on the equipment and how it reacts to understand that the ASAP will, or sorry, the shock pack will not deploy fully if operated properly. But it's an adopted concept from the fall protection industry is like, if you fall, it's going to deploy. You're like, okay, it's a good thought, but like now, here we are many years into operating with the ASAPs. Now we're into the third generation of the ASAP, right? And the education and understanding and knowledge is understood a heck of a lot more than when, the ASAP was introduced. So, we have that little bit of grace because of understanding and knowledge. And we're less off of the principle base and we're more off on the technical base.
Agreed. And I think you bring up a good point. I mean, I'm teaching a fire department rope rescue class right now, and they want to know about anchors. And that's always a big thing is, what am I allowed to anchor to? Does that anchor work? So I write up on the board, work safe BC, 22 kilonewtons. Sprat, you can go down 12 kilonewtons.
Yeah.
NFPA G, portable anchor, 36 kilonewtons. And they're like, this isn't helping. Those are three entirely different numbers. I said, but how do we get to the numbers? WorkSafe BC is a CSA regulation that's attached to CSA fall protection equipment or fall arrest equipment with shock absorbers or lanyards that limit the force on you to a certain amount that they can say, use a 5,000 pound anchor, much like ASAP, 12 KN, 2 times max arresting force, however you want to look at it.
Yep.
So everybody's done this for their industry. Our problem is we get people that come in from different industries and now try to utilize gear that I'm all for off-label use. I'm all for, industries mixing and training in thoughts, but understand the basic building blocks of that industry and where it came from to understand how to safely employ on their pieces of equipment. And that's where I look and go, the MPD, we've been using it for years without tailing, without incident. In reality, we've been using a lot of devices without tailing, without incident.
Yeah.
Maybe no one's reported them. Maybe they, they just caught them in time. Maybe the technicians have been, more trained or more aware of what's going on. But maybe as we've been changing systems so much, we've changed from this to that, to this, to that, we've missed some of those basics. And so this is where you look at it and you go, okay, we're rappelling with IDs. We go to a rope access class and rappel with IDs. When I teach rope rescue, I'm a firm believer that the first device a person rappels with is an 8.
Yeah, exactly.
Because if you let go of your brake hand on an 8, what happens?
You're going to have a bad day.
You figure out if your safety's important. But you know what I find now with I've got my ACMG for climbing gyms.
Yeah.
You know what you find the kids doing now? They're one-handing gree-grees on the way down. You're like, whoa, stop. Look, why? I just let it go and it stops me. Because they have no idea why a brake hand exists anymore.
Yeah.
I see it a little bit when we teach rope access. Some people come in and they'll lazy that brake hand. If you teach them to rappel on a device that mandatorily must have a brake hand or you fall to your death, you don't make them fall to their death, but you get the idea.
You're going to have a bad day.
Yeah, you train the skill, and then you give them devices like Siriuses or IDs or whatever, and they understand the brake hand. If people were trained to use an ID or an MPD properly with a brake hand through a friction horn, they should be able to control the load, unless it's icy or wet, in which case call for a tailor. It's because that their brake hand weak, and I don't mean weak in the fact that they're not doing their, Jocko workout at 4:31 in the morning. They're not employing their brake hand correctly, so we've added another person to be their brake hand.
Yeah.
That's a little unfair. I mean, the human can only grip so much, and we can go into the math on that. We're definitely increasing that grip, but I think that has something to do with it as well.
Right. So, you mentioned the ACMG. And, when you're in a climbing gym environment, you're outdoor climbing and, you have someone coming down for the first time it is a communal rappelling situation, whatever else. The what is that term that we use when it comes to the secondary safety for that person that has a lack of experience rappelling down that line? And this is kind of where my head went with it. When I first heard it, I'm like, oh, they're doing the fireman's belay. No pun intended.
Yeah,
But
there you go.
but and here the firemen are like, we don't like that. No, just all jokes aside. But now that it's being called a tailor, and I'm just like, my head automatically resorted to calling it a fireman's belay. Um,
And that's when I joined the fire department, that's what it was called.
yeah, yeah. So and that's where my head went as soon as I heard about it. I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. But yeah, it's an interesting concept because you know in the global spectrum or even North American spectrum, we're talking Search and Rescue BC initiated this conversation, and here we are. Here, fire services manufacturers, Petzl being one of the largest manufacturers of gear in the world, um, have bid onto this conversation and now are starting to potentially, introduce that into policy.
I think a lot of it was Basecamp Innovations was the
Mm-hmm.
company that was hired to do the EMBC studies.
Okay.
Basecamp Innovations is also the designer of the MPD.
Ah, okay.
If Basecamp Innovations designed the MPD, does some studies and says, hey, with inexperienced users or slippery rope, we can get into a situation in which we can get a runaway, basically. I mean, it's not really, but where I'm going, we should add a tailor. Is that the manufacturer? I mean, does the manufacturer at that point have some sort of duty to go, hey, this is the people that designed the device that we're making. And they're saying in certain situations, it's paramount that we have a tailor in this.
Yeah.
And I think that's why the conversation took so much traction. If Mark Pfeiffer went out and said, hey, we should tail IDs, people would be like, yeah, don't hire him anymore. He's an idiot. Right?
That's another person. We don't have that extra person.
Yeah. But if I designed the ID and said, hey, I've done a bit more testing and I've found some flaws in the system in certain parameters.
Yeah.
Petzl, you're making it. I designed it. I think you might want to look at this. That's a whole different conversation piece.
It totally is. Yeah, let me. Knowing that makes it just that more, sturdy or I'm trying to think of the word here, but like what I'm trying to get at is like, yeah, because the manufacturer or the tester of the manufacturer in conjunction with WorkSafe or BC Search and Rescue, they're the ones that notice the problem and it basically from their due diligence kind of put the word out there, being like, hey, FYI, we found something. It wouldn't be any different from any other manufacturer as well, right? Like, how do recalls happen, right? Is because a manufacturer found something that wasn't okay, and through testing, through experience, through product failures because somebody had an incident or whatever the case may be. It's just them doing their due diligence and getting that information out there.
And to be clear, I mean, we just sent Ronin staff through some base camp training, went up
Mm-hmm.
there, took a look at the new system, some of the new testing. Base camp doesn't advocate using a tailor 100% of the time. Like when he's talking to us and we're looking at it and they're like, if you don't have the manpower, don't do it. If you got a spare swinging dude or, these other parameters come into play, by all means, throw a tailor in there.
Mm-hmm.
EMBC SAR has gone that extra route to make it mandatory.
Right.
The designer has said, we have found some areas with certain parameters in which, we've come up with some concerns and some problems. And like you said, made that the public aware of that, mm-hmm. not as a recall, but basically as a training, note.
Yeah.
But other organizations has now taken it and made it rote. And I think that's where some of the confusion is as part of it.
Yeah. And it's just like a conversation like this will really shine light on that conversation for the people that are kind of in that line, that gray area, being like, am I supposed to or am I not? And that's kind of really my objective here today is just talk about that for the people that are on that line, that cusp of like, do I need it or do I not? Is it policy? Is it not policy? Where did it come from? And just kind of understand this whole conversation that much better.
There's a great line. It's the guy that teaches our tack rope stuff, ex-army guy, and he uses it quite a lot. He says, "Is the juice worth the squeeze?" And I think that really plays out well in rope access and rope rescue.
Mm-hmm.
There's multiple ways to do it. I can go redundancy on redundancy, but with the scenario that's in front of me today, is the juice worth the squeeze? Right? I've got dry ropes. I've got guys that are run MPDs for decades. Small team, we've hiked in, blah, blah, blah. Is the juice worth the squeeze to try to bring someone else in here to tail those ropes?
Yeah.
I'm going out, I'm in crampons, and I've tied myself to the side of a cliff. It's snowing sideways, and I'm running ropes through snow. Is the juice worth the squeeze? And Pat's the guy that says it. I'll give him credit for it right there. But and that's, I think, a really good line because everybody wants the answer to the question. They want it yes or no.
They want it yes or no, and they absolutely hate when we say it depends.
Yeah. And that's the better line that I've heard.
Mm-hmm.
Sit down. It's almost like a business person looking at return on investment.
Yeah.
Is the effort I'm putting into this worth the result I'm getting back? And the easiest way to look at it is we do single rope technique in the fire service. And people go, what? When I pull a body out of a river, I'm on single rope. What's the consequences of failing the line?
He goes
I
back
can't
in the
kill
river.
the person again. Exactly. Why would I potentially damage more gear, what have you, for no gain, for no benefit?
Yeah.
Right? Is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yeah.
So, and I think that you got to look at that the whole way through.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right. Well,
Did we answer the question or confuse the point?
no, I think we answered the question. It definitely got to my senses there. So no, absolutely. So that's basically all I wanted to chat with you today. I think we kind of nipped that in the butt and kind of understood where it came from, why it's been implemented or being implemented in some jurisdictions, who it really pertains to, and you know what situations it pertains to as well. Like, unfortunately, yeah, it depends in a lot of cases. So, yeah, thank you very much for your time there, Mark. For the people out there that have some questions for you about whatever topic, or if they're looking to kind of get in contact with your podcast, what's the best way for people to reach you?
Email Mark at M-A-R-K Mark at roninrescue.com. If you find me on Facebook, my name is with a C because I don't know, at some point I was thinking Facebook would get too much information. I think they have it anyways. But yeah, it's with a K in the email. Or you can, like I say, we have Facebook, Insta-tweet there, Twitter, all that jazz. And obviously the podcast is Apple, Spotify, SoundCloud. I think the same stuff that everybody's kind of on. But yeah, we love to hear from you. Send questions, send comments, send hate mail if you want. We do, probably like yourself, get a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And it helps us.
100%.
I mean, you're not the only person having this question out there. Don't think that you're dumb or, I'm stupid, I can't figure it out. No, you're not the only person that has these questions. Contact Mikey, contact us, and just ask. I mean, that's how the industry grows. And the best thing about the rope industry, at least thus far, touch wood, is people like to share stuff.
Yeah.
They still like to share. You can walk into my shop. There's no state secret in here about, don't look under door 3 because it's a secret in the Colonel's sauce. Nah, it's ropes, it's raises, it's lowers, it's belays, it's rappels. Like, it's a mindset, and we're happy to share these things, right? Like,
yeah,
way you go.
Yeah, we're happy to share it because at the end of the day, we're trying to expand that knowledge to keep everybody out there safe and, make sure that we're all on the same page.
Absolutely.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you. Great time.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. It was a great conversation with Mark from Ronin Rescue, or the Ronin podcast, Ronin Cast. Thank you very much, everyone, for tuning in. It was always a great conversation, catching up with Mark from the Ronin Cast or Ronin Rescue on Instagram, Facebook, Insta-tweet, whatever he wants to call it today. But yeah, let me know what you think about this whole topic. I'm not really sold on it, but I can see where it's valuable in cases. Obviously, like we said, we don't want to dumb things down any more than things seem to be dumbed down, but you also have to have that ability to add a sense of security to the overall encompassing system. Is this the right way? I don't know. But it also depends on the industry that you're working in. And are we talking fire rescue? Are we talking search and rescue? Are we talking, urban rescue? Are we talking rope access? So it really, really depends. And unfortunately, yeah, that is the greatest answer of all time, although you don't like it. But hey, yeah, let me know in the comments below. If you like this episode, please make sure to like it, hit the subscribe button as I put out new content every Sunday. Don't forget to hit the bell to be notified when I do post new content. And yes, as always, until next time.